if anything, we'll have a YouTube video. So,
all right, cool.
So, hey guys, we're back for our weekly webcast, Tokenomics and DACs at EOS Ignite, and we have our regulars here, Luke is here for just a few minutes. I know he has to take off, but it's always good to get an update with EOS DAC, because they're kind of leading the way with all DAC kind of related issues. So feel free, Luke. Feel free to give us an update.
Yeah, thank you. And again, thank you for providing this forum. I know we're just kind of getting this started, and we have like a huge audience that are like, yay, all things DACs and tokenomics and economics. I want to just, eat and breathe this stuff, but we will. I really do think that we will, because this is exciting stuff. I do have family in town. We're actually going to go do the whole pumpkin patch thing, and we're going to be taking off pretty soon to do that. And I've been in a bunch of DAC meetings this morning. And I was just thinking, hey, we could even talk about just what was going on this morning. So we had a great meeting about content strategy, our website, all these kind of things. And it was really helpful to hear from all these different people from all over the world that are participating in the DAC as it is so far. And basically hear from them saying, we need more leadership. Like, we need clarity of vision. We need people to step up and say, hey, this is what we're doing, everybody, which was very counterintuitive. And it was kind of surprising, because they even asked me, they said, Luke, you're really the right person to do this. And 3 different people who are pretty influential in the DAC up to this point were like, Luke, you're the right person. You should be taking more role of a leadership, representing the DAC, clarifying our vision and clarifying how our content strategy is going to serve that vision, how the website's going to meet that, all that kind of stuff. And it was really kind of interesting, because I'm really all about decentralization and building kind of these flat structures. And yet we recognized on the calls, we talked it through, that you can't get past human nature where we are right now. People like hierarchies. They're comfortable with hierarchies. They're comfortable with, a leader telling them what to do. And we don't have enough people who are comfortable saying, no, I'm going to go out, create my own destiny, create my own reality, go see what needs to be done and do it in such an amazing way that everyone around me goes, oh, that's fantastic. Let's pay you to keep doing that. Like, that's the model that's worked really well for the DAC so far. Those who have the, ability to just, and the free time really, and the skill set to just go and create value, have been the ones that have been the most successful on the DAC so far. And others who are kind of like figuring out their place and needing to be told, like, go do this, you'll get paid this amount. They've struggled a little bit in the DAC. And it's been very interesting to realize, like, we can't just go from 0 to like this futuristic reality that I envision in my head and others do as well. There's this process of kind of like onboarding people to this new way of thinking that, no, there is no boss. No one's going to tell you what to do. Like, you really have to create value yourself, and you have to do it in a transparent way that the whole DAC agrees to. So like, if there's a worker proposal that you submitted, but it was vague, and that was one of the conversations I had today, there was a worker proposal that was vague, and now they're a little frustrated because it's not what they delivered isn't being accepted. And it's kind of like, well, and I asked them in a call, I said, well, do you think you delivered that by? And they're like, well, maybe not. So now it's kind of like, well, so what do we do about that? You already put a bunch of work into it, but just clarifying the importance of communication. Like, if we're not talking about deliverables as we're developing them, then, things don't work. And it's really easy with a hierarchy. You just be like, the boss said so, doesn't matter if it's crap, do it, Whereas in a community environment, it's like, hey, everyone's got to agree to that story. If we start approving a worker proposal, for example, that doesn't have a clean deliverable that represents that value, then people would be like, wait, what? And they'll start gaming the system. They'll be like, I'll submit a worker proposal. Well, you paid that guy, how come you're not paying me? And it quickly can get out of control. So I appreciate that what we have now, people are trying to protect that value. But so anyway, I just to clarify, I'm realizing we're not clear enough on our vision as EOS DAC. We are an excellent block producer on EOS.io, supporting that infrastructure and that ecosystem, and we are a DAC enabler. And that's really it. And we may actually have to split those into 2 separate websites, with our DAC chain initiative that talks all about DAC enabling and DACs, and then just have a pure like BP website that explains EOS DAC's value as a block producer to the ecosystem. But clarity of that is so important. And I'm really excited that you guys are interested in talking about and hearing from what we're doing, because I really do think this is the future. I actually just got back from Colorado. We could talk about that a little bit too. I was at the Connexus event and helped out with EOS Rise a little bit. And then they had a town hall event with Eric Voorhees. He was there. And I got to ask a question about, like, because they're interfacing with the government. And I was like, how are you talking about DACs at all? And it was really interesting how they're just like, they love the question. They're like, oh, such a great question, but no, not yet, because we don't want to do any harm creating legislation for something we don't fully understand or, really know what it is yet as far as DACs go. So, but it was cool. It was a very neat reception from that town hall panel of how much they like DACs. So what we're doing is important. It's pretty cool.
Thanks a lot, Luke, for the update. So does anyone want to chime in that issue about, leadership and decentralization and just any comments about that, Haley or Justin?
Definitely. So, Luke, do you think it's like a question of like, do you stick with the current plan and people will get used to it and adjust? Because like you say, people are not used to having to, make their own liquid leadership up. They're used to having that leader there. But can people adjust to that situation? Do you have the right people that are able to adapt? Like, I'm just wondering which way you're leaning, whether, people need to change or you need to let some leadership in by a democratic process, for instance.
Such a beautiful question. I mean, I think you clarified it exactly, the struggle, because I am definitely of the idealistic, somewhat irrational perspective that like, we're just going to change. Everyone's just going to evolve and grow and it's going to be awesome. And I think I have that perspective because I've done a lot of self-work over a decade, just like, and more than 5 years in the decentralized blockchain space, that my brain actually thinks that way. And so I know it's possible. I built the decentralized team for 10 years with FoxyCart, with people all over the world. So I know that I'm a data set of one, that somebody can go from hierarchy, corporate type to something decentralized and voluntary. So absolutely, that's like where I'm going to press. That's my tension. My pressure is always going to be to just challenge everybody to step into that mode of flat, transparent, open, add value, and build a story that people believe. And yet this call today was a really important call for me that we just had with a lot of the team to recognize, like, not everybody's there yet. And there's a sense of frustration that they're feeling that's harmful to them and the DAC when their expectations are in one place. And and a lot of people are pushing this vision that's just way down the road. And it was helpful for me to hear them say, Luke, we're making you the leader. You need to lead. You need to represent more. You need to be more involved. And I feel like I have been for the two major pieces, the DAC enabling, which was why I've been pushing with the tech team to launch the member client, which I know you guys, I don't know if you've seen it or not. Keep helping us, members.eosdac.io. Get that out there. If anyone has EOS DAC tokens, get them registered, because we have to hit that 15% registration to really launch the DAC on chain. So if you guys could serve the DAC and myself and help in that way, just promote that members.eosdac.io. That'd be really helpful. And then the second part is the block production. And I work with Rob and Michael as a 3-part team, and we have a worker proposal to do that. And it's just, there's just so much going on there. There's no way Michael or myself or Rob can keep track of it all. And so just like getting Trello set up with cards and like really focusing on that, saying, okay, these are the things we need to do in excellence. And it's a challenging thing, because you could spend you could have a whole team of people 24/7 working on it, and there's always more to do. So it's just really a matter of like, how am I going to carve off enough time to focus on that? So I've been focusing on those two main things. I realized the content strategy, the branding, the messaging, the regular news updates, these things are kind of causing other challenges, and there's leadership needed there. And so I'm just, what I was thinking about today, I really need to time box myself and really, I don't like having a set schedule, kind of like that voluntary freedom. Yay, do whatever you want. But I'm recognizing I really need to prioritize my day. So every day I've got hours dedicated to these different sections. And that's really, I think, the level of leadership that people are looking for. And then if I can model that and create systems around how I do that for myself, hopefully we can have other people, like you said, democratically, voluntarily, just being like, oh, I'm following this process and now I'm the leader for these areas that people look to. And then, oh man, I'd absolutely love being delegating, to other people that can lead.
That's great. And it's kind of interesting. You also kind of, to back up, you mentioned you kind of are decentralized at FoxyCart, which is your company. And maybe you can kind of maybe add a little color there. And also, do you see, with your experience with FoxyCart, how you got to a point of decentralization, or maybe some challenges that you can kind of apply to EOS DAC.
Yeah, no, it's actually a really funny example because so my business partner and I, Brett Florio and myself, we built FoxyCart back in, we worked on it in 2005, 2006, and we launched in 2007. And it was like a part-time job for 4 years. I was still working a full-time job as I was building that. And then eventually we started bringing on team members, and we had a team member in Russia and Pakistan, Australia, all over the place. And I sold that business this year. So after 10 years, I sold that back to my business partner, and he's running that. But there was a point in time when he and I were both studying flat company structures and all this kind of stuff. And we actually approached our team to say, hey, how would you all like to just like be co-owners of this, essentially make it fully flat? And it was really amazing. It's funny. I'm just laughing now that you asked that question, because like, it was really amazing that the team itself was like, we don't really want that. We kind of like just having a clear paycheck, and you and Brett taking on all the risk as owners and as entrepreneurs, and we just knowing that we have a nice job that is secure. And I was just shocked. Like, both of us were like, really? You don't want like a profit sharing plan? You don't want like, where everybody just gets to share in the risk? And it was that moment that I recognized that risk taking is a valuable asset to any group of people, and not everyone is conditioned for that. And entrepreneurs are, but they're a small breed. And so I'm glad you asked that question, June. It's actually a great way to remind myself, like, oh yeah, we ran into this on some level at FoxyCart as well. And it wasn't even set out to be a decentralized system, whereas this is directly trying to be a decentralized system, and yet we're still running into that kind of human nature of like, hey, risk is, and again, not everyone's in a place to do that. A lot of people are just barely getting by financially, or whatever the situation might be, and they can't take the time to be engaged in something like this that's so risky and unproven as a full-time thing, especially if they're not getting paid.
Yeah, and I think it's not just risk. Like, I think some of the other problems you were talking to about being the DAC, and like, do people really want full decentralization? One example I always look at all the time is the Boaty McBoatface referendum. Well, because I think it's
such
like
a great example. Yes,
I think it's a super cool social experiment where you basically gave a bunch of people who didn't really care the decision-making power, right? So there's probably some people who really wanted that boat to be called like, Prince George III in honor of, but instead you gave the decision-making to people who were more concerned about, how funny it would be to be a troll. That actually outweighed the actual thought of like, what should this boat really be named? And you get Boaty McBoatface. And just whenever we go down the route of referendums and EOS or DACs, I always have to think about that. It's just like, if we decentralize all the decision making to people who don't care, they don't have the context, they're not an expert, you might just get Boaty McBoatface, or dare I say President Trump, right? Like you just kind of people just, they're gonna not care as much as you want them to. So in a way, I get why they're calling on you, someone who's passionate, to kind of give them direction, is because, I think we see it in EOS too. I think there's a lot of people just in EOS who go, God, I wish someone would just tell us, would just give us a constitution, yeah.
It's so true. I mean, and it's funny too, because I've I don't know Dan Larimer personally well, but I've watched him and I've interacted with him a little bit on Telegram and stuff, and there have been times where I've seen him be just like, I don't want to be the guy that's telling you all what to do. Like he might, and it was great. Like, I hung out a whole bunch with Phil Meissner in Colorado, and he worked directly with Dan, and I got some cool kind of inside stories, and it was neat that he agreed. Like, Dan is a genius. He really is a genius. And that was my perception of Dan's intellectual ability and what he's been creating since ProtoShares and BitShares 1.0, BitShares 2.0, Steam and EOS. It's just incredible. And at the same time, yeah, there's times where he could just, push things forward. And so he recognizes too, I think, that there's this balance between, oh, cool, someone just said the member client looks dope, Luke. Yes, I agree. It's pretty awesome. But yeah, it's like, there's two parts of it. One of it is the book Skin in the Game. I just recently finished listening to that. I really highly recommend that. It's Nicholas Taleb. Really fantastic way to think about these dynamic problems with our species and how we motivate ourselves and how we find risk and all of that. Like, Skin in the Game, super great way to think about that. And then two, it is easier just to have someone who knows what the heck is going on just come in and say, do this. It is, but we're not going to grow as a species if that's what we rely on. And we're going to have more Boaty McBoatface situations where like I've had the same discussion often, is everybody's vote equal? You know, and it's like, well, it depends, right? Sometimes, you know, yeah, every human being has value, and everyone, and that value should be represented in their specific context. We just want a plutocracy or an oligarchy or something like that, where the richest, most powerful people make all the decisions. And at the same time, I don't want my gardener making a decision about my heart surgery. Like, his vote does not matter in that situation. The heart surgeon's does, who's spent years of skin in the game effort to understand this particular situation. So it's, yeah, it's challenging stuff. But yeah, it might be Boaty McBoatface. Who knows?
Yeah. And I think that's, I mean, it makes complete sense to me that we charge down this path, and then we basically kind of hit like resistance into why the world has worked the way it has for 1,000 years, right? Now we have the technology to do stuff that they never had the tech to do, but there's still some underlying efficiencies and just challenges that we need to overcome, right? I believe the balance is somewhere in the middle, where, you know, your mailman has a say on, you know, some things, but not on your heart surgery. You know, like, if we gotta strike the balance, you know, between full kind of top down doesn't work, and no one likes it, but full bottom up has some problems too, because, you know, there's no context. Like, the context is very important in a lot of decisions, and you just can't expect everyone who just comes across the problem, or everyone who has a vote, to understand what is often some very nuanced, tough decisions. So it's such a trade-off. And I think every DAC, not just EOS DAC might be the first, but we're all just going to face it. We're all going to come up with a different structure of how we basically, you know, delegate the authority to someone, and then evaluate that authority on how they did it, and probably an iterative process, you know, because I think delegating authority, delegating decision-making, that has to happen. Otherwise, yeah, it's Boaty McBoatface, you know, is every time.
And for those not super familiar with what we're doing with EOS DAC, and real quick, I want to give him earlier shout out. He brought this all the way to EOS Nairobi and handed it to me. I was like, oh, he remembered, because I was on a talk there that they were doing in Africa, and he brought me my necklace. But what we're doing with EOS DAC is the token holders vote in 12 custodians, and that's for a 7-day period. So it's pretty liquid. It's not as liquid as EOS, where block producers at any instant can be moved in and out. So you still get those 7 days to kind of like work with that team, have meetings, get to know each other, and be transparent about it. But it's still fairly liquid. Like, we've had criticism of that, saying you should have a year-long, you know, that's what the corporate world is used to. 7 days, that's insane. Our thought is with that is, one, you're not going to voter apathy of every single person have to be involved in every single, you know, decision for the DAC. You know, we have to vote on everything. So we have this leadership structure of these custodians. And then 2, most likely those who add and demonstrate the most value aren't going to be kicked out every week, right? They're probably going to serve more than a 7-day term, most likely. And eventually it'll kind of stabilize. And I've seen this on Steam. You know, I'm a witness on Steam, position 10, and people continually vote because I've built that reputation to be trustworthy and add value to the ecosystem. And, you know, I hope that EOS DAC will be in the same place. We're currently like on the bubble. We just got bumped out. We're not in consensus. But eventually, hopefully, we can just continually add value, and the best block producers will rise to the top, and they will be the main ones that are just providing incredible excellence, and people can trust that the network is secure, and then move on to other things with their time and attention, you know. So, but at the same time, I want to support those kind of new upstarts who are coming in, and there has to be a pathway for someone who's providing more value than the incumbents to get up there and do that. So I think that token-based voting is a really cool way to do that. I think delegated proof of stake really handles that in some interesting ways, but it's going to be an iterative process. And I really do. I'm encouraged by the approach we've taken with EOS DAC to kind of lead the way with one possible way that we can structure DAC governance. And I also think that, you know, the DAC chain initiative that I mentioned will be another way to explore that even further by making code changes or whatever we need to support what the different DACs we start enabling need. And then with that too, the greatest thing about it is everything we do is open source. Oh, sorry if I'm getting a little choppy, talking fast. Everything we do is open source. And so it's going to be an iterative process with the entire community. So even as people say, hey, have you thought about this? Have you thought, like, liquid democracy is another interesting approach where you could set up individual proxies for different categories, and then they can represent you and your token weighted vote for different specific, you know, areas of expertise. There's all kinds of cool things that we can explore.
That the proxies are, I think, one of the coolest things I see evolving in the EOS ecosystem, and it's kind of like a flexible variable, right? We almost have like 3 layers of delegation. Token holders can not delegate and delegate their basically their stake straight to BPs, or they can do it through a proxy, which is like another layer, and that variable is, you know, all tokens could be proxied or no tokens could be proxied. So the community almost gets to decide how much they want to kind of delegate their due diligence to these proxies. And I think it's a really cool thing. And just kind of seeing how things have evolved in 3 months, I wouldn't be surprised if proxy voting doubles and triples 10x's from here on out, because it just makes a lot of sense. You know, I don't want to, if I was a regular token holder, I wouldn't want to live and breathe EOS, but if someone convinced me that they did and I trusted them, I'd probably happily give them my vote. So.
Right, great. So any other comments on what Luke has said about EOS DAC and any of the challenges that he's kind of discussed? I know Justin Buck sent a link to the Ray Dalio video about says reputation, but how to build a company where the best ideas win. I saw that TED Talk video. It's great. If we could implement that somehow to experiment with, I think that'd be fantastic. I just have a vague notion of how it works. It was just more about the overall like impression I had from the video that made me think, yeah, this is fantastic. But I don't know exactly what the details of that process is like. So. Anyways, but Ray Dalio, how to make the best ideas win in a company, just getting everybody involved. That's kind of the high level concepts of his TED Talk. So, anyways,
maybe we could watch that and we could come back and comment on it. You know, because I haven't seen it yet. I just bookmarked it. I'm looking forward to watching it. And like I said, I do have to kind of run.
Sure.
Radical transparency is awesome. But real quick before I go, and then you guys could keep your conversation going. And thanks again for having me. I just wanted to highlight too. I mentioned it briefly, but there's some awesome stuff going on in Colorado, both in Denver and Boulder, and it was really neat to see how excited people were about DACs, and that continues to be this theme that I see. I gave a talk that was similar to the talk I gave for EOS, you know, the conference we did, the virtual conference you put on, Jude. It was a modified version of that, about a 20-minute version. And again, people were just really excited to hear that story of how DACs are changing tokenomics and how they're changing the way we interact as communities. But then also hearing those people directly interacting with the government and hearing about their excitement for DACs, like people who, you know, really get this and have been in that space for a long time. It was exciting and it's encouraging, and it reminded me like what we're doing matters. What we're doing is so important, and it's really a privilege to be, you know, pushing these kind of new ideas so early on. And we might be a little bit early. It might be a few years before everyone else catches up, but ultimately, you know, this is the moment where we get to build our own little reputations, our own little added, you know, values, so that people can look back and say, oh, okay, we see the contributions up to this point. So all the people we look to as leaders and people were standing on their shoulders, eventually there's going to be people looking to us in this conversation, standing on our shoulders going, man, these guys were pioneering some of this. And that's a pretty sobering place to be, to recognize that place in history. And it's kind of neat too. It's kind of fun. So anyway, I'm going to go. We're going to hang out with the family here in a bit, but thank you again, June, for providing this forum. I think it's really cool, and I look forward to continuing it as time.
Sounds good. Thanks for joining us, Luke. And yeah, we'll
see you guys.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Next week. So, all right, guys. Any other kind of follow-up comments that you guys are anything in your head about anything you want to discuss on top of that too, like just in general? I know Justin, last week we spoke and we were trying to figure out maybe you know, what companies we can discuss tokenomics, like, you know, any projects that we can discuss their tokenomics on. And we did EVAs last week. So that was, and then Justin was thinking maybe we could just kind of discuss one project every week if we can. Haley, is there anything in terms of tokenomics or DACs that anything pressing that's on your on your mind that you want to kind of share? Same thing with you, Justin.
Nothing really pressing. The stuff we're kind of working through with EOS Cafe DAC, it's I mean, it's not a sexy topic, right? It's kind of like legal, and if someone don't, are we a non-government organization, and like if someone gives us money, is it a write-off? It's not, it's not flashy, right? It's actually kind of some of the nitty-gritty, which you have to work through, and it's good to know the answers, but it's I don't have a bunch of kind of stimulating debate on it.
Okay. Yeah. There's the kind of the nitty gritty stuff of DACs as well. Luke just mentioned that I think I guess the place you were gonna visit is closed, I guess.
Yeah, no, my wife, just because she didn't want to interrupt, she saw I was on the call, but they just found out the place that we were gonna visit. We're gonna do like a pumpkin patch thing. Her parents are in town. They're closed because it started raining. So she's like, "Oh, I didn't want to interrupt, but you can stay on your call." So anyway, I just want to say that like Haley, I actually wouldn't mind talking about the non-sexy legal ridiculousness, because that's actually like, that's the hard part. That's the stuff we're trying to figure out too. And I think I touched on it briefly, but we're going to be, actually Sarah was in Switzerland with Rob last week, creating a Swiss corporation that we now have, and we're getting Swiss banking, and like, and thinking through the relationship between a service provider who is a centralized traditional corporate entity and a DAC, and then also to the liability for the individual members, how it's not, this was kind of my question at the panel, the town hall meeting, was that it's not individual contract law and it's not corporate law, but it's still exposed to like tort law and other kinds of litigation concerns. So yeah, it's probably worth discussing, even though it may not be very sexy and exciting. It's the real work, right? It's the work we have to do.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, actually, I'm also interested in that. Just for what you mentioned, Luke. It's corporate law, contract law, and how that fits in with these DACs. I've been really like thinking about a lot of things in that area. So maybe, yeah, if you could elaborate, both of you, both Haley and Luke, about like some of the thoughts, some of the just some of the ideas you're thinking about, and why it's different from corporate or contract law. What are the differences, and where you see this, where you see kind of the progress and how to form this and design this.
Well, so one of the main challenges that we're having, or just conceptually, is if you can create a DAC, you can create kind of the structure where no one could own it, and ownership is fluid, much like a stock where people are getting in and out. But at the end of the day, a human being needs to sign a piece of paper somewhere. There's just no real way around that. It's like, basically, especially if you want the DAC to own assets, something needs to own the assets. Some corporate entity needs to own the assets, and then somebody ultimately needs to sign for that corporate entity. It's really hard to find a structure where you say whoever owns this private key, is actually the owner, and that can be anyone, and that can change. That's kind of the real thing that we haven't really found a solution for, and it's basically a bunch of workarounds. But at the end of the day, a human being is signing a document, and that basically creates the entity that will become the DAC, and that's a lot of pressure and a lot of responsibility for that one person. And there's we're technologically we're beyond where we are legally, where you could actually say, no, this entire entity is owned by a group of people who own a token, and the private keys to their token is their membership, and that is fluid. Then there's no one who signs the document. I guess I'm kind of going in circles now, but that's like conceptually the problem we're having, is just the concept and the legal realities don't necessarily match.
Yeah, I would totally love to comment on that, because that's exactly kind of the stuff we're working through as well. And so, for example, the way we're thinking through solving that is with the concept of a service provider. And this is a traditional corporate entity that only exists. It's not the DAC. It's actually just provides services to the DAC. And it has, because a big part of this that we've talked to our lawyers and talked to different people, a big part of it is the liability and how that's distributed. Is it distributed to every single member? So let's say, the four of us are in a DAC and, I do something stupid but they can't get a hold of me, but they can find June. So then June becomes, he's responsible for everything that any individual did. And that's essentially the problem with, this is what the concept of corporate entities solve, that liability of distributing it, saying, no, we're giving up that. And there's a personhood entity that can actually be taken to court and that kind of stuff. So the challenge and how we've been thinking through that is essentially where that liability really, the rubber hits the road, is in business. When you're doing business, so you're signing contracts, you're like you said, ownership, service contracts, that kind of stuff. And the discussion we've come to so far is that the DAC probably shouldn't have those contractual relationships, because then it opens up the DAC to a lot of liability. Instead, the way we're structuring it, the way we're thinking about it is, and we actually just had a call about this recently too, as we're continually refining and working on this, is it so the DAC and the custodians have these worker proposals that individual members fill out, and then that's going to go to, like, the funds to pay that out will go to a multi-sig wallet between the person who created the worker proposal, the multi-sig 12 multi-sig of the DAC, and then also the expert / arbitrator, who prior to any contractual anything happening, they agreed, yeah, they're going to be the tiebreaker. So if the DAC's like, man, you didn't provide any value, and the person's like, heck yeah, I did. What the heck? Pay me my money. We find that kind of in between going, you know what, really, they didn't provide much value. And we would only evaluate it being worth this much. So we'll pay this much. We'll modify the worker proposal or something like that. Or they'll come back and be like, heck yeah, they did. You just don't understand. This is valuable and you committed to doing it. You need to pay it. And then again, we have this beautiful transparency with the community saying, hey, look, now that expert's, reputation is on the line, or that arbitrator, because they actually said, no, I signed up to be able to, mediate this. So, and then the other key part being when that payment actually goes out, it's not going to go out from the DAC custodian funding account. It's going to go into a holding account that the service provider owns. And this is a whole separate entity, which we're either going to go with the Swiss entity, or we're going to have a new entity in the UK, most likely a normal standard corporate limited liability company. And there's going to be using EOS time delay transactions as well. So there's going to be time delay. So if somebody tries to hack the DAC and drain all the funds, we'll be able to stop that. As a community, we can change, who's the custodians and do that kind of thing. And that idea being that all those contractual relationships now are with that limited liability corporation that is just a service provider with the DAC. So as an individual who goes out to create a worker proposal, they could say, hey, I want to do this. The idea is they're actually going to sign a contract with that service provider because they're actually engaging in business with them. And they're going to work through any kind of jurisdictional issues, such as like workers' compensation, or is this at will employment? I mean, all of this craziness that can show up in any different jurisdiction you're in. We should think about that, because you can't sign away your rights. Like if your jurisdiction entitles you to a certain number of rights and expectations as an employee, or something that could be seen as employee, that has to be figured out. So hopefully we could do that with the service provider entity. And they were talking about DocuSign and some of these centralized approaches. And we're like, please, no, can we at the very least do that as a multi-sig on chain? Can we, just push just a little bit on the traditional approaches with corporations and how they, bring people into contract law. So that's currently back to our original question of, do we push, how far do we push to try to push new systems? And at the same time, don't find ourselves in a situation where people are like, well, that's not helpful in court anyway. They should have actually signed a piece of paper and done a PDF or something. So, but that's currently the approach we're thinking of, is that you have the DAC, which is a completely separate, actual DAC decentralized entity. And then you have these individual service providers that hopefully start to, provide different mechanisms for different value. In the beginning is only going to be one, but we'd like to see multiple service providers. And then that kind of distributes things. But again, it's really risky for those people. Obviously, like you said, somebody's got to actually put their name on it and be like, I'm the guy who's, but hopefully again, with the traditional model, they'll have insurance as well. So, I mean, they've asked me to be on the board of these, but because I'm an American, some of these places are just like, nope, if there's any token involvement, we don't want Americans.
Right. Yeah, that's a fascinating and very interesting structure where you have a real limited liability company or corporation that as contractors to the DAC, so that it will essentially kind of you'll be able to resolve, I guess, liability issues. So they'll be liable to they'll be the consumer facing organization. They'll have a real world entity and jurisdiction wherever it's formed, and so they'll kind of take on the liability as well. And then so there's then in turn there's like a, you know, it's like an intermediary. So they have a contract with a DAC that probably has less potential for maybe some liability between service providers and the DAC, right? Is that something, because the alternative approach, sorry, Luke, I don't know if you had to go, but
my wife off screen that we're going bowling now, so I can hang out for like 5 minutes and then we're gonna take off.
All right.
Yeah, no, I think you're talking about it right in terms of the thinking about where the liability lays with the existing legal framework and the legal structures. Like whether or not we have these grand visions for the future, we still have to work within the existing structure. And the existing structure is a concern where if you have, you know, 100,000 people part of a DAC and any one person in that DAC could do something that could harm others, then any custodian of those 12 that is public and accessible. And I've already seen this happen with like friends of mine where, you know, they go into a partnership with 2 other people and those 2 other people fall off the map, and the government, you know, the law doesn't care. They're like, well, you're available, so pay the money. And like, then that one person gets liable for everything. So we want to protect our members and avoid that if we can.
Yeah. You know, I was just at a meetup, at a legal meetup, and one of the lawyers actually threw out a term that kind of resonates with me for this particular topic, is this idea of a common law partnership. If this is seen as a partnership between all the DAC members, then there's potential problems compared to if you just created a corporation, which I think limits the liability. And that's kind of one of the great benefits of a corporation versus a partnership, because, you know, the way partnerships are set up, the liability is kind of really shared amongst everybody, and can really make those situations like where you mentioned, you know, maybe a couple partners do something and now you're liable. It's like it makes it very difficult to manage. So he was saying like, yeah, that would be like the worst, because it's common law partnerships are very difficult. Like, but I'm still trying to think about it to kind of make sure that, okay, maybe it's something like that can maybe work, or like just maybe try to structure something more like a corporation. Because ideally, I think the alternative is just to have this entity purely on the blockchain without any jurisdiction is kind of my goal, right? With everything. I'm hoping that's the case where we don't even have to set up any corporate entity, any partnership or whatever outside in meat space. So
yeah. To that point, and we haven't put it up on our website yet, but one of the organizations we're helping with is Travis with the Beehive Collective and the Honey Token and the Pollen Token. He's building this incredible process that basically all his vendors, all his suppliers, everything he's doing is in cryptocurrency and on the blockchain. And so it's essentially kind of like, this is the first time ever that you can't go and like see someone's account and steal their funds or, you know, garnish their wages or something like that. So I do agree, June, that is the future of where we're going, but how we get there so that individuals can be held accountable with, like, for example, bonds. You know, you're going to take a risk, you're going to put up a bond, and that way if you harm the DAC, it's not the whole DAC, it's your own bond that gets taken. You know, those kind of things, back to skin in the game idea. But ultimately, I think what we're trying to do and what we're kind of accomplishing right now is this hybrid where it's like we have this purity of a DAC that we're keeping as pure as possible, decentralized as possible, and then everyday realities of liability concerns we're going to push to another entity that can deal with it in a traditional way. And then we're just going to start evolving that evolution, you know, evolving that process of governance where ultimately that service provider can be removed. Their point of failure, sure, their centralized point of failure, you know, as Justin Buck just made a great comment, you know, never give that much power to one individual, including yourself. So we notice that service provider has a lot of power. You know, they could just mess up the contracts with our servers as a block producer, for example. Like, that would be bad. And yet, ideally, it's a fluid process. So we have other entities that can take that role and spin up quickly in a more traditional sense, and those can just be swapped out. But so this time, I guess I need to go for real because we're all going to take off. But again, thanks for dropping me back into the conversation. I hope we can continue it because this is the meat of the stuff. And Haley, I think that's a great conversation to talk through because we don't have all the answers. We got some, lawyers we're talking to and stuff, but it's going to take a community effort within EOS and within EOS DAC and all these other DACs that are being formed.
Sounds good, Luke. Have fun bowling.
All right, see you guys.
We'll see you guys next week. So I actually had a follow-up question that I want to kind of follow up with Luke and maybe you guys, because he mentioned something about contract law too. And so that's the other area I was thinking about when it comes to liability. If you can somehow create a contract between the DAC and the consumers or the users to be in some kind of contract to manage the liability, because our intent is to have a kind of run a business in good faith, right, and just try to do well. But things can happen. So can you contractually limit a lot? Not even limit, like at least determine kind of like how to resolve liability issues in a contract? And he mentioned contract law, so I wanted to. Are you guys aware of anything like in contract law that can maybe simulate the corporate's liability structure?
The problem I think is that contract, like if a DAC has a contract between itself and all its members that clearly defines things, the DAC itself is still an entity that is part of that contract. It's kind of like you'd need a contract between all the members would only have a contract amongst themselves. As soon as the DAC needs to be its own entity on a contract, it basically needs a human to sign something when they create that entity. Maybe that wasn't your question, but it's
kind of related. I mean, it does make me think a little bit kind of broader about the question, because you're right, because the DAC is composed of members, and I was thinking of this entity that's already exists, and its relation with, I guess, the consumers or publics or other members. So it becomes more like, okay, you have members that could also be users of this DAC as well, right? And it's like sometimes it's the same, and so it does open up the question. But so this entity, kind of this DAC entity, true, if it is, does it have some kind of authority, signing authority over all its members, and does that make it an organization that can sign a contract almost, or you can have a contract with its members and with users? So it's almost like there is this entity in the middle. To me, I have just a vague like definition of the concept of the DAC. So I guess we would have to dig into the details of exactly, okay, what are the members kind of assigning any kind of signing authority or any authority to the DAC, or is this just some visual, like more virtual representation of this organization? And you could do a massive multisig or something where it's more like a partnership kind of thing, and that's what I'm saying. It's like, so it's hard to think about, but I guess if we really dig in, maybe I can kind of ask the question a little bit more clearly about how that will interact with people, so users. So anyway, so yeah, that's a good point though, Haley. So I mean, it is relevant to the question I had, but
anyway. Just to concisely wrap it up, I'd say, like, I challenge anyone to create a legal entity without a signature, like without a signature of a human. I challenge, and for a DAC to be a true DAC, that's actually quite a hurdle. But you cannot create a legal entity without a human signature. So I've actually been kind of playing with this idea in my head of like creating a corporation where, let's say I'm the sole owner of it. And let's say I make that corporation, like somehow I make it a smart contract. Maybe I make it a very simple DApp that makes a very small amount of revenue. And then I sell the shares to itself, let it live on the blockchain. And then I would almost want to challenge some authorities to be like, is this thing that I've created that now owns itself legit? Or like, you know, is it a legally legit corporate entity that is now autonomous and lives on the blockchain? Or is the second I sold it to itself, did I trigger some legal precedent I'm unaware of? Because like we need some device like that where you basically have a fully autonomous corporation before I think DACs are going to be true legal entity, like, you know, autonomous things.
Yeah, and I think that's a good example. I would also mention, you know, that DAC is probably still controlled, and if we're using some kind of voting system, and if it's using some kind of share mechanism, it's probably owned by some people as well, right? So it kind of goes back to this massive multisig amongst all the members, I think, where everyone has like these shares that can vote on, you know, the direction of the DAC. And so if it's almost like everyone who's either automatically signing or manually signing something that determines the actions of this DAC, it still can be, and based on like the weight of tokens, it's still a way of kind of acting and signing on behalf of the DAC, but based on like the majority vote of all the members in a way, right? So you can in a way still not have this one signature, but a signature that represents the entire membership, right? So it's like this just multi-sig or massive multisig that just says, okay, do A or B, and everyone keeps voting. Is just kind of like EOS, and so it's not like this one person just like is like signing on behalf of the community necessarily. It's just everyone voting every time for each action, rather than just one person signing. If you're going into meat space, and if you have a physical organization, sure, you do have to have some person, but you could be a trustee as well. So you can set up a trust where you're a trustee of this DAC, and all you're doing is acting on their behalf. So you could still not be a kind of an part of like an operator in the company, and still be like just a trustee. And I think you can still sign on their behalf. That's another thing to think about. If you create a meat space organization, just become a trustee. All you're doing is saying, I'm a trustee for this virtual organization, and I'm going to sign. You could get a bank account as a trustee, right? So that might be the trust law is another interesting area that we should pursue, because trust law and corporate law were kind of, you know, and I think in history kind of formed around the same concepts, that there's these, you know, these entities that are like not individual people, but, you know, there's just entities that are either for particular business or just for to act on behalf of other people. So trust law and corporate law are two areas. So that's what I was also thinking. Just trust. Like, can we just create a trust that does a lot of things to interact with the real world, rather than us being like the actual physical corporations and being more actually more liable. So as a trustee, all you have to do is be a fiduciary. So you have to be faithful to the terms of the trust. That's your main responsibility. You're not like they can't sue like a trust. They can't go after you. You're just a trustee, right? So anyway, so that's something to think about. And then there's also like a lot of things with smart contracts. There's this company called Trust Token where they're creating stable coins, and they have, you know, they have a way of using trust law to hold assets of dollars and real estate and other things using a smart contract. So it's something maybe we could look to them to see how they structure their operations. So anyways, I'm talking too much. So
kind of curious, say kind of the EOS kind of blockchain went down, or like who would be legally responsible for that? Like, as it's pretty much a DAC. Like if you were running a certain accounting software, or sorry, more so a financial ledger piece of software, if there's a bug in that software that causes data loss and a company kind of loses its whole financial ledger overnight, causing huge financial losses, they would be able to sue that company. But with the EOS kind of blockchain, which is basically a financial ledger in a new format, like if kind of all the data gets wiped, I know it's incredibly unlikely, loss to businesses because the blockchain is frozen for several hours or, you know, a whole day, then it'd be interesting to see from a legal standpoint, who is legally responsible? Is it the block producers who are in the top 21? Is it all block producers that have a certain amount of votes? I don't know. Yeah,
that's a good question. And, you know, I would think that, and this goes to, you know, the question of what is a DAC? And I think EOS is really a DAC when you think about it. And I think one of the questions from Patrick is about, you know, what is a DAC? You know, do we need it? And so EOS, I think, is a DAC. And so when you pose that question, it is really, is anyone liable on chain? Are any of the block producers or anybody participating in EOS responsible? And part of the Constitution tries to eliminate all of that liability. I think articles, I think 3 through 8 in the version 2 of the Constitution, and is block 1 10% liable. So is all token holders liable? I would say it's a good question. They may challenge it. They may say this is kind of like a corporate structure and that there should be liability because we're all participating in it. I think it's difficult to enforce is the biggest thing when it comes to that. And I think this is something we have to think about with DACs that are built on EOS as well, where it's really difficult to enforce. So we do want consumers to have kind of recourse over things that are like misdeeds from either any DACs, EOS included. But I just think enforcement wise, you know, we're kind of immune. And in some ways, the other flip side is, you know, you almost have to just say, hey, like, you know, everything has a risk. It should be kind of understood that there are risks when using any of these systems, so that if they are going to do it and there is no recourse for if something goes wrong, that they have to be comfortable with that and have to do their own backups for data and do those kinds of things. So I would say, you know, that you know, it's a difficult question. I think they may try to do something. Block producers are probably going to be the biggest targets, but you could always vote people out. So I think ultimately the DAC is, or the EOS DAC is immune from any kind of interventions from in any any lawsuits and liability from kind of sovereign states or within sovereign states. So, but anyways, that's a good question. I'm hopeful that it's immune, but I do feel like we should create structures that entice people to use us and kind of compensate people if they feel like there's some negligence on our side or on the chain or on a DAC. So anyways, so
it's a really interesting, like we have no precedent. And actually I just got thinking, like, I don't even know, is it even illegal in just not just in EOS, but in cryptocurrency to steal someone's cryptocurrency? Like, I actually do not even know of, like, if I'm a US citizen and I steal another US citizen's Bitcoin because I found out their private key, I don't even know of a single lawsuit. I'm not saying there isn't one, but I don't know of one where one person's taken to someone else to court as though you stole money out of my safe. because they're kind of different. And the general attitude in cryptocurrency has kind of been, if you get involved, if you own any, that's your risk. If you build an app on this technology, that's your risk. If you build a business based on this technology, and it gets hacked and all your cryptocurrency is gone, you know, that's your risk. Like you know, in the DAO hack, I don't know if the like Consensus, the company, has ever been sued. If the DAO hack sued them, like we have very little precedent in terms of what happens when, you know, basically a crime is committed in the cryptocurrency space. It's kind of the Wild West, and it's, you know, it's rather ruthless from what I've seen. But it would be nice especially if we want enterprise to build on the blockchain, on EOS especially. You know, these are kind of questions that we're going to need way better answers on, I think.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I do think we do have to build things, systems to entice people and have some sort of some sort of I guess compensation for any kind of wrongdoings. The thing about theft is a little bit tricky. Just that's another governance topic, and I think keys are just a difficult. You know, private keys and ownership is a difficult topic, and right now it's just, if you own the keys, it's really like you own it. So if you like, even if you steal it or whatever, if you own the keys, when it's code is law, you're just owners of it. It's a very different kind of property system. But I'll just mention this. I mean, property title is actually more complex than people think. If you have a deed to a title, doesn't mean you necessarily own it under the kind of the laws of equity. If someone unlawfully obtained title to it and then sold it to you, you know, you technically, even though you have the deed, doesn't mean you own it. So this is the same thing as property titles you can think of as keys. In common law, it's like, yeah, if you have like a property title or the keys, that means you own it. But in regular law, or like in laws of equity, if someone like stole it before and then sold it to you, it's the owner of the previous wronged person. And so it's the same thing. But then where does that, like, there's a conflict there where what does that mean? Because like it could be like 20, 30 years ago or 50 years ago that this happened, right? And then it was sold properly, let's say every time after, like the property, and then it finally comes to you. So the last, let's say 10 owners could have just been totally legit, but does that mean we all lose rights to this property because, you know, 100 years ago something happened? And so these are the issues with property title and keys that are have been at kind of, there's been issues with even in property. So it's not entirely clean, regardless in regular in meat space, I guess.
For whatever reason, I see a parallel to Ponzi schemes. Often in Ponzi schemes, some of the first people to get in actually make a lot of money, right? Because like they're the people who are getting 10% monthly or whatever ridiculous thing it is, and it's the person running the scheme who never makes any money. But sometimes there's people who got in early who made a lot, and then there's all these victims. But are they, you know, and then figuring out whether they're guilty or whether not to take money from them is all about like, well, did they know? You know, like, did they know it was a Ponzi scheme, but it was in their best interest to just shut up? You know, because like, how can you tell those people, oh, I need to take money away from you because that great investment you made was actually a scam? Anyway, I just see some parallels between what you're saying, like 10 generations of an item being legit, and then it turns out, oh no, this was stolen in World War II, and then that person's the rightful owner. I don't know. It's kind of similar. It's a murky area.
Yeah, no, I do see the parallels there, because sometimes, yeah, like people get caught up and they're kind of innocent. They just get sucked into something that they just think is like they're not doing anything wrong, and then, but you know, really, like, yeah, the whoever kind of originated this pyramid scheme has, like, you know, full like malintent, and everybody else are just kind of, I guess, useful, like like, I don't know, well, just unfortunate victims as well. and that's what happens, you know. And so I think that's the same thing. It's like, you know, you can own the property and you never, I mean, are you going to vet everybody? Like for, especially like, you know, like 10, 20 years ago, you're not going to vet like that far back, right? You're just going to vet like, okay, I think this one's legitimate. And so if it's all like, if things have happened in the past so far back, it's like you can't almost expect anyone to do the research to make sure that it was like legally obtained for the, you know, for generations back. So anyway, so it is a tricky issue. It's not like clear cut. That's why sometimes code is law is like, and common law is actually, it's more rigid. It's like you own the keys is really kind of, you own the title. It's like you own it. And they also, there's a legal concept, you know, not, you know, possession is 9/10 of the law. Really is essentially that concept that, hey, if you own it, it's more likely than not yours. You got to prove that you don't own it. And it's the same thing with the keys. You got like the preponderance of the evidence has to be that, you know, there's something that, you know, you can prove against you just owning the property and the keys. So, and that's probably a safer approach, a more conservative approach. But I think for key management, I think we do have to open it up where if it is kind of an obvious thing where someone either like just kind of hacked into it, like intentionally hacked into, we resolve that. So we kind of maintain some flexibility there, maybe have some statute of limitation saying, okay, like, you know, you got, you know, 1 year or something where you just limit it, and that would be that, or something like that, where, you know, you maintain some flexibility to prevent people from just like hacking or stealing your keys, and then but not make it so that it's like you're looking at like generations of you know, key like selling keys like from one person to another essentially. So anyways, but another topic is like governance is a big thing. We'll discuss those topics in the governance webcast. I mean, that's one of the big issues with ECAF and governance, and this is one of the big issues. It's like it's almost so hard to resolve the way we're trying to do it. I think it's safer to just use code as law, and then maybe at another layer talk about like how to prevent thefts, or how do you protect from thefts and arbitrate thefts as well. So.
But we have a base sense of fairness, right? Like, so in the 2 million token hack that just recently happened, yeah. I mean, intuitively, we know that there was a hack, that 2 people claimed ownership, 2 people had the private keys to the same public keys. They both said it was theirs. And, you know, nothing gets resolved in ECAF, but stuff gets frozen. So they intuitively we knew that was a hack. And we have the sense of fairness that says, no, the person who originally owned it, whose keys got exposed, they're the real owner. So we know that intuitively, but at the same time, if they both know the private keys, you know, are they like, if code is law, then they're both the owner, you know, and whoever gets it out of there first and gets it into a new account first, they're the real owner. And that's, you know, it's weird because I think we all just know that that's wrong. You know, like our sense of justice just knows that can't be, but not letting it but creating enforcement around that, you know, then we have all the governance stuff you were alluding to. That's just it's a huge can of worms. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And I do agree with those. I think there's a way to just kind of narrow down the scope of it, and then just prevent the ones that are intuitively what we feel like, hey, you know, this is just wrong. Like, so if it's intuitive to us, like, you know, we could probably narrow down to things to just prevent just what we think is obvious, right? So anyway, so that's another topic. It's an interesting topic we should discuss, maybe, you know, hopefully in the governance channels, because yeah, I think you know, this is a hot topic there. Yeah, back to DAOs and DACs. I mean, is there? Yeah, it just gets really really in depth.
We could. I think Patrick's asked 3 questions here, so maybe we could.
Sure. You feel free. Yeah, I tried to kind of answer like a couple of them, or the first one. Oh no, I didn't. I was just saying, I was giving an example that EOS is a DAC. But yeah, go ahead if anyone wants to answer those. Can you explain the structure of a DAC, why we need it, and you know, what are the components of a DAC? Does anyone want to try that?
I'll take a really quick stab at it. I wish Luke was here because he has a great analogy, but in Luke's presentation, he talked about, you know, how there can be like employees, owners or managers, and like customers, and how those can be, you know, in the traditional sense, you know, everyone is a different category and everyone's kind of at odds. You know, the employees want to make more money, that would hurt the owners. You know, the owners want to make as much money as possible, which can hurt the employees, you know, which puts them at odds, I should say, against the employees and against the customers, because they charge the customers more, everyone makes more. And the customers, it's the same. They don't want the employees to make too much or too little, and same with the owners. So you have basically everyone who's involved in this, you know, let's say it's making chocolate bars, like, you know, everyone who's involved, they're all involved, but they're all kind of at odds. And in a DAC, you break down some of those barriers, because what you do is you give everyone stake in the entire organization, the entire operation. So anyone can be a customer, anyone can be an employee, anyone can be an owner. And if you tie that all to a token, for example, DACs don't need tokens, but they're often similar. But you know, if you tie that together, everyone's incentives are aligned. So a customer who wants the organization to do something that it's not doing or do better can kind of just volunteer and join the organization as more of an employee. An employee who doesn't like the management can then become a manager, and anyone with stake can influence the organization. So it just kind of, you know, Luke has a very nice kind of flow chart of it, but it really got me thinking about what a DAC was, because that's a big part of what it does. Is it basically, it takes away these traditional roles and categories that often are at odds with each other, and it tries to align the incentives and also kind of disseminate the decision making to everyone. And why do we need DACs? It's just a cool new model of doing things. I would say it challenges the status quo, and it's because we have the technology to do it. So now that we have the technology, we're breaking new ground to see, does this new organization model even work?
Yeah, no, that's a great way to explain it. I would also, there's a lot of other questions. I mean, I'll quickly follow up with it. There's another way to explain it just based on the acronym. So decentralized, right? Meaning, you know, a lot more people involved in decision making and management, right? So and it's not as opposed to centralized. Autonomous, meaning it's either like independent or sovereign as an entity. Some people say it's also like automated, like there's some automation behind the organization, right? So that's also the autonomous. So either sovereign, independent, maybe automated, and then C can stand for company or corporation or community or you know, so the DAC or O for organization, right? So a DAO is or DAC is just any organization that you know has those elements, you know, decentralized, autonomous, and you know, and it's an organization. So and hopefully it makes things more efficient. I'll tell you why I'm so excited about DACs. Hopefully the management is more efficient than centralized. You get a lot more people involved. You get automatic transparency in your accounting. Most companies, public companies and private companies, books are probably cooked if you want to be a little bit yeah, I mean, blunt about it. And then you also have a way of fundraising and distributing kind of efforts in a way that's far more efficient. So, you know, it's more like the equity structure of being able to raise and distribute tokens to all the people that contribute. So anyways, there's a lot of benefits around DACs in general. Just it's a more efficient, more automated way of organizing, I think, than traditional organizations.
So yeah, it's kind of interesting, like that first question, like what is the structure of a DAC? And I feel like it doesn't really have a specific structure, because a DAC can be anything as long as it's, like you say, it's decentralized, it's autonomous, and it's a community or a corporation or whatever you want to have C stand for. And I think that's the exciting thing, is that people can design it however they want, and we can explore kind of what's going to be more efficient. And we're just going to see so many different variations, and maybe we'll start to categorize different DACs based on kind of how centralized they are, how they work exactly, how the voting happens. There's just going to be so many variations. It's not going to be one specific way of doing a DAC.
Yeah, I agree.
I think you need to toggle your mic there, June.
Sorry about that. So I'm trying to answer some questions. Where do you see a DAC like EOS in, say, 10 years? That's a long time. That's like in crypto years, that's 100 years. But maybe any ideas about what you see with EOS specifically?
That's a super interesting question. Like, I have no idea, but I'm kind of curious to see how BPs will develop, how proxies will develop. I used to think of like BPs as, these organizations that might develop into massive political parties. I'm not so sure about that now. I'm starting to wonder whether proxies are actually the political parties that will do all the campaigning. I don't know. It's kind of, it's surreal. I don't know if Haley has more opinions on this.
I mean, my opinions would be more, it's hard to answer that question about EOS specifically without thinking about blockchain. For me, like, I've always thought that blockchain needs to get to the point where we can't see it. We're not actually dealing with private keys. It's the back of the TV. It's not the front of the TV. So I do have high hopes for what I've been hearing about V1's wallet. I've always thought that one of the holy grails of blockchain is when it meshes with biometrics, and when somehow your biometric information becomes your private key. And I think that if we could ever get there on EOS, I think it really unlocks everything, because now, like, everything we're talking about, it's really cool, but it's limited to a subset of people who already love blockchain. They don't mind dealing with private keys. They're already onboarded. Adoption beyond that set of people is very challenging, because you have to, just teaching the average person how to use scatter. It's not impossible, but it's a barrier to entry if people are just kind of interested in what a DAC is. Just showing them scatter might be enough to put them off the whole concept of owning a token. Whereas if we can get to the point where it's just a phone app, and one analogy I use for DACs is like, because I do think Starbucks, the rewards points, I do think those points are tokens. So sometimes an analogy I'll just use is like, well, what if the people who accumulated the most Starbucks points in a year got to choose the flavor of the next cappuccino? Because that's kind of like what a DAC is, right? It's bottom up decision making. It's, if you have tokens, you influence behavior. So I think if once it's in an app form and right on your phone uses your biometrics, and you can start making decisions and accumulating tokens, I think the sky's the limits for basically the feedback loop between the people who say run Starbucks and the people who use it. And I think we can do cool stuff in charity. I think we can do cool stuff in politics. I think that, once we get the barrier to entry of just blockchain lower, the sky's the limit with DACs.
That's interesting about EOS is that there's two different futures that it could have, and it depends on how much we bring to that base layer in terms of voting and control over the EOS ecosystem, and whether we kind of separate those layers and have more governance on the individual DApp layers. Because like you're kind of alluding to there, I kind of feel like in the future, like people won't see really EOS at the front facing, they'll just see the dApps themselves. And maybe kind of EOS will just be this sort of foundation for the direction of development on that greater EOS network. So it'll be very, very developer focused in its intents and all its decision making. And then there'll be those other layers of governance that truly come from the DApp layers themselves. But otherwise, like there's that other future where maybe like that base layer is involved in kind of lots of decision making that deeply affects the dApps themselves. And so, yeah, I feel like there's two different futures there. And I hope that there is like a separation of duties between that base layer and the dApps, and there's not too much control at the BP layer itself.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the future holds with EOS. I think we can see a possibility of many chains, EOS related chains, sister chains, or whatever you call it, and things are a lot more flatter. And maybe EOS is maybe a reserve currency chain, or maybe just does exchanges or something specific. And I think, yeah, a lot of it in 10 years will be abstracted away, so that at least on the user side, I'm sure there'll be a lot of technology to we'll see about how far like the actual kind of whatever it's AI or AR or whatever, how much that matures in 10 years. But you could, at least on the consumer side, I don't imagine people having to kind of spend so much time voting and doing the kind of the regular things that we do right now. It should almost be a kind of intuitive of like thinking something and it happening, rather than like manually having to vote and research and do all this on the chain to kind of direct the chain. So hopefully when the usability comes, everything else will just be more intuitive and be easier to just contribute to without really even noticing that you're helping to make a decision on the chain. So I don't know, it's just kind of a vague description, but so, and we'll see how advanced technology is, like where, anyways, I don't want to go too far into kind of, yeah, because I saw this 60 Minutes, like MIT has this lab where this guy has this thing that essentially is hooked up to his, I think somewhere on the side of his head, and it's like he can just think something and it can search like online for whatever he's thinking without saying anything, right? So, so I was like, okay, if we get to that point, and that it was working when he was demoing it, I was like, okay, so things are where you're just like thinking things to take actions on things. I don't know how far we are though. That it seemed like it was working. It could be either very quick or it could be like 20 years from now. I don't know. So, but yeah, it is exciting times regardless. I think it's probably going to happen sooner than later.
Yeah.
I don't know that.
Yeah, and I think like these are just absolutely fascinating times because we have so many technologies coming to fruition all at once. We have artificial intelligence and machine learning just like really starting to outpace humans everywhere, whether it's creative or just number crunching, So we have artificial intelligence, we have Internet of Things, we have blockchain, biometrics, longevity. All these things are kind of the like, I don't even know what to call what you're talking about, June, but like, like neural linking to like us actually linking up to our machine infrastructure. Like it's and all this, it's where this stuff intersects is where the stuff gets super exciting. Like Internet of Things is awesome. Internet of Things on the blockchain with artificial intelligence is like, you know, is another thing entirely, right? So we have all this stuff just, you know, kind of just out, everything, technologies never move faster, and yet we're basically at the cusp of like world changing technologies that are all intersecting. It's a crazy time to be alive. Yeah,
there is this convergence going on. Yeah, it is crazy to think about. So I wanted to answer one real question. Do we consider BCAP a DAC? So that's blockchain capital. It's the token. So maybe Justin, if you can chime in. I know you said you were pretty familiar. You probably have a few tokens, or
yeah, I've got some BCAP tokens. I don't think it is a DAC. I know so it's basically the first time that they've pretty much put like a sort of like a stock or a fund, more of a fund on the blockchain. So it gives you, you know, the capability to invest in, I think, was it Coinbase, or no, it was Block One, Ripple, and all these other different companies. And then there's also a mixture of cryptocurrencies added in there also. They do have a portal that's not on chain, that it allows you to vote for what they invest in next, but it does seem incredibly centralized. And I think without kind of that on-chain governance, and that with having a central control involved, I don't think you could call it a DAC. What it is it's a security on a blockchain. It is, I'd say, the accurate descriptor of what it is.
Cool. Yeah, no, that makes sense, Justin. So, all right. Yeah, we're getting, you know, we're about an hour 20 or so in. Do you guys want to discuss anything else? Maybe final words? You know, it's good to probably try to keep it at around an hour and a half at most. And we can maybe just discuss any other topics you guys want to address next week. It's just so that people are interested. And if you're in the audience, just let me know if there's anything that you guys are thinking about that you guys want us to talk about. Hey, Stefan. So yeah. So any ideas? Justin, Haley, any ideas?
Well, I think it'd be cool to look at a tokenomics system. You know, I always like digging into those, and I love other people's opinions on them. So I don't know if the audience gave us some homework on like one DAC-like entity, or just maybe any tokenomic system, we could all kind of dig in.
Yeah, definitely. I think one that I'd suggest could be Karma. I think that'd be an interesting tokenomic system to look into. We discussed some last week, didn't we, June? Do you remember which ones we were talking about? Or Emanate, I think, was one of the ones I was thinking about.
Yeah, so we did EVA, and then someone mentioned a few. I'd have to look back at the chat logs to see what the recommendations are. So then Karma and Emanate is what you mentioned, and there's a few. So yeah, let's decide.
Tribe's a good one. Rusting.
Tribe is another. So maybe we could maybe vote at the beginning of the session. We could just have maybe 3, and let's just vote on it, and then we could just dig into the details. Or how do you want to do that?
Well, we could do the vote now.
Vote now? Okay.
Maybe, I don't know. Can we do a poll in here, or?
Yeah, I could create a poll. Okay. What DAP would you like to discuss next week? Read tokenomics, I guess.
Yeah.
Tokenomics. And then so so we have Karma, right? Karma, Emanate,
Tribe.
I haven't heard of Tribe, but Tribe. Okay, Boyd.
Yeah, Tribe is a
Everpedia. Oh, yeah, Everpedia. Actually, I like every I like every video. Okay. So anyway, okay, so we got tribe.1. I'll put tribe.1. So we got Karma, Emanate, tribe.1, Boyd, Everpedia. Last call. Any other ones? Oh, Horsepay, I think I saw. Okay, we got a lot of choices for it.
Shard's suggesting we do 2. We could probably have enough time to do 2 actually.
Okay, we might be able to do 2. We'll see. We'll do the top one and the second place one. And we did kind of like, yeah, we did EVA last week. So I mean, do we need to do it again, Justin, or do you think it's sufficient?
EVA. We should do a new one, I think, next week, but then maybe the week after we could have the founders of EVA on to kind of discuss it in more detail.
What is crypto peso and BCH? I don't know about BCH. So okay, that's it. That's a last call, guys. Unless you guys type something, I'm gonna be done. Okay. So there's the poll. Like, you guys see the poll?
Well, this is a tough choice. Are we allowed to vote or?
Yes. Yeah. You go ahead. Everybody gets to vote. And the other thing is, we have Lumios, which is a polling app. I should put Lumios in there too. What am I doing?
Oh, that's true.
So they have a polling app we can use for the polls next time too, and you could earn Lumios tokens for voting on polls. So
yeah, I'd love to do Lumios.
So we'll do it next week.
Get the prototype up and running and show people. That'd be good.
So we got Tribe is, we got a lot of people who want to talk about Tribe. Okay. All right, cool. And then Karma is second and Horsepay is
equal. Yeah.
Is tied. Everpedia is fourth. So all right, cool. So we got 3.
Yeah, it looks like we're doing Tribe. I think we need a tiebreaker between Karma and Horace for the second.
People are changing their votes just to kind of mess with us.
All right.
Horace.
So now people are even like, now when I mention that, people are also like, so we need blockchain voting, of course, next time. But for now, it seems Tribe is our winner for discussion, and then we could. So this will be it. We got 7, 8, like 10 votes. So okay, cool. We'll talk about Tribe next week, and if we have time, we can go to Horsepay is second. So
cool.
Definitely sounds good. Awesome, guys.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, sounds good. Hey.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Have a good one. We'll see you next week.
Cheers.